Hi, all. So, my resolution is that the United States federal government should make mandatory minimum sentencing unconstitutional. We have 3 minutes on the clock and start. So, I'm going to start by defining some key terms. So, we have mandatory, which means required by law or rules, which is something that's compulsory. Minimum sentencing means a person convicted of a crime must be imprisoned for a minimum term or sentence that a judge cannot lower, and unconstitutional, which means not in accordance with the U.S. Constitution or with any procedural rules. The weighing mechanism in this debate is our net benefits, which is if I could prove through my plan that the status quo could be ultimately better, then I should ultimately win this debate. I'm going to start with my observation 2 and go into my background. So I have my first argument, which is mandatory minimum sentencing laws force the judge to actually hand down minimum prison sentences based on the charges a prosecutor brings against the defendant rather than a judge's actual full scope of the issue and the defendant at hand. Every crime is different, every defendant is different. A judge can't do that and scope exactly what's happening with those minimum sentencing laws in place. My second argument is that states have a lot of laws regarding this, which means that these laws take away from the judge the traditional and proper authority to account for actual circumstances of a crime, which undermines his authority ultimately. And that leads into my third argument, which is mandatory sentences have the effect of transferring sentencing power to judges to prosecutors. Prosecutors sometimes actually threaten to bring charges into a long sentence, and these threats are effective in actually scaring a defendant to plead guilty in exchange to reduce for a reduced sentence and give up every factual and legal basis for a proper defense, even when the crime that the person has committed is really minor or not as big of a sentencing, a big of a sentence that it deserves. So I want to go into my observation 3, which is my plan. And I have my plan for this is that the United States should aim to create a new sentencing reform bill, which highlights that mandatory minimum sentences are reduced for some low-level offenses, and ruling for minimum sentences should be in the hands of a judge to implement the minimum sentence for that specified crime, rather than having it already laid out for him. So the solvency I have is, which is how could my plan ultimately work, is that over time with a new reform bill, the government will have a sufficient reduction in incarcerated individuals, which will lower our prison budgets. And lowering those prison budgets will allow that money to go back into different things for the government instead, like schools, roads, ultimately enhancing our country's community for the better. So for these reasons, I hope the audience will vote for the affirmative.